Hello, everyone, to the week that really was as we begin August and we officially enter the dog days of summer where news goes to die and Sarah Ryan goes to the Galway races. How was it, Sarah?
It was good. It was quieter than other years I've been there. Maybe I don't know if that's just me or
Well, you'd have been there, of
but
course, in the heyday of the Galway tent and all that stuff, wouldn't you?
yeah, I was right in the thick of it, John.
Uh,
Um, no, well, yeah, I was in that once actually. No, it was quieter than other years. I don't know. I usually would have always gone on a Thursday and Friday, so I don't know if like Wednesday is normally busy, but it was good crack. It was good crack. I did not win anything. I'm furious.
yeah, you do. Sarah doesn't like losing, which is a good trait to have. And yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, it was a sort of busier week than usual for August. I mean, we had some truly bizarre stories, some kind of typical stories, which we'll get to in a while. But you said before we started you wanted to talk about something or somebody called Lizzo.
You know who Lizzo is, John. Don't lie. You know who Lizzo is. So
My
for anyone
understanding
who
is
doesn't,
okay.
Lizzo is a singer with a very popular singer actually, and she has a couple of songs that are, pretty good. But for me personally, who she is and everything like that she talks about in terms of her, political activism, shall we say, annoys me. She's a champion and a cheerleader for diabetes and obesity, clearly, and dressed up under the guise of whatever, body confidence. And I'm all for people being body confident, but Lizzo is, and I'm not saying this to be mean. I'm saying like if people don't know who Lizzo is, you could just look her up. But she is very heavily overweight.
She
There's
one of
no
these people
doubt
who
about
talks a
that.
lot about fat shaming and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So she talks a lot about fat shaming. She wears extremely skimpy outfits on the stage. I don't really care about that. Whatever you do, you. But I do think she's a symbol of a problem, which is that, put it this way. If I was to go around talking about how it didn't matter that I was smoking 20 cigarettes a day and it was great and the like that you were shaming me if you told me that it was bad for my health, I'd be absolutely crucified. And being obese is the same, if not worse, for your body. The outcomes for your health are terrible. It affects every single kind of possible element of your physical health, and probably your mental health as well. So this kind of idea that it's no big deal and you should like flaunt your weight or whatever is something that I'm not comfortable with, given that I know lots of people who have suffered tremendously with being obese and whatever. So
Well,
that
you're
aspect of
talking
Lizzo,
to one. You're talking to one. I mean, I can bring some perspective to this as somebody who's been chronically overweight, not through like one of the things about being fat is that you get these assumptions made about you all the time. Oh, he just eats chips all day, doesn't make an effort, and all the
yeah,
rest of it. Like it's not true. Most people, most of us who are sort of on the chunkier side, spend most of our lives trying not to be chunky. Like
yeah,
you celebrate the few pounds off here or there. You're stressed like big events like weddings and things. You're really stressed about finding clothes that fit you and looking okay. You spend your whole life hiding what you are. I'm a relatively confident person and comfortable in my own skin. I'm familiar with that. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. I mean,
yeah,
I'm not nearly as fat now as I was at one stage. In my middle teens, in particular, I was a bit of a whale. But you get past. You, it's the idea that it's nothing to be embarrassed about. So on one level, I think that's fair enough. I mean, because there are those of us who make an effort and just like find losing weight really difficult, and there are other people
yeah.
who eat and do all the wrong things and never seem to put on weight. So there's a bit of a genetic thing there. But I think where it gets damaging is this idea that just like go be
It
as
doesn't
big
matter.
as you want to
Yeah,
be. No,
yeah.
that's
And I
unhealthy.
mean,
I
I
agree.
think that I think that as the thinking has evolved over, especially from my casual observation, maybe the last 10 years, that like it used to be very much more viewed as a much more simplistic thing. As you say, you're lazy and you eat too much and that's it. And if you just did this and you just did that, you wouldn't be X, Y, Z. It's not necessarily true. I saw such an interesting interview with Jordan Peterson about a year ago, maybe it was less. And the person interviewing him was a really clever kind of question, I thought. She said, well, you released 10 rules for life or 12 rules for life X amount of years ago. you've done the tour, now you've written a second book. What were you wrong about?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, like, what, in hindsight now, when you look back, like, what were you wrong about? And he said, I was wrong about the relationship between obesity and just simply eating. I oversimplified it, and it's emerging now in science that it's much more complicated than that. And, you know, like, that's something a lot of people really struggle with and whatever. And so pretending that it's a nothing thing and that it's, you know, you're just being you and whatever is a disservice to people. It's unhealthy, and you wouldn't be allowed to get away with it in any other health, you know, dimension of health out there. But Lizzo does, and Lizzo is, you know, a queen, and she's proud of it, and that's all wonderful for Lizzo. And Lizzo is the absolute, you know, darling of a huge group of, you know, women and like that are they think she's God. And this week, it has emerged that a number, and it's not just one, it's three at least, and then another woman that I'll get to in a minute have emerged and talked about bullying, fat shaming, working for Lizzo, how horrific it was. Another thing I find really interesting was they were on tour and they were brought to some kind of sex show, and Lizzo made them get involved in the sex show in ways that they didn't want to. Then there was another woman who's coming.
Is this why I keep hearing about bananas?
Yeah, gross.
Okay.
I'm not even going to get into that. People can Google it because it's so disgusting. But like, if a male, like if a man had encouraged, suggested anyone who worked for them to do this, their life they would be cancelled on the spot. I mean, it's just obscene kind of behaviour. Then there was another woman who came out and said, well, in light of these dancers come out, I'm actually going to come out and say that I was hired to do a documentary on Lizzo. I went on tour with her. I quit after 3 weeks because the bullying was so appalling. She's a mean, horrible person. She treats the people around her like this, that, and the other. Now, Lizzo has come out today and said that she never fat shamed anybody, and that everything else is just sensationalized story and she's not a villain. But saying that it's a sensationalized story and that you're not a villain is not denying it. Do you know what I mean?
No, it's not.
I think it's a really interesting, another like really interesting lesson in that, like a lot of the kind of discourse around, like, you know, all of this kind of weight and female roles and whatever, they make idols, and you shouldn't. And, you know, idols that are politically aligned with you are just as capable as falling as the supposed far right idols that you think all the baddies is the side that all the baddies come from. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that brings me on nicely to one of my former idols, poor old Rudy Giuliani.
Right.
Because he had the same thing happen to him this week. I mean, first of all, I think I should say about Rudy Giuliani, he was one of my idols, like when he was, you know, sort of 2001, 3, 4, 5, you know, where he was America's mayor. I thought he would have made a really good president of the United States. But like,
cleaned up New York. We could do with him here. We could do with old Giuliani.
Yeah, I think that version of him, absolutely. But I often think, you know, if Rudy Giuliani had, and I wouldn't wish death on anyone, but if tragically he died in, say, 2005, 2006, there would be streets named after him in America. You'd have Rudolph W. Giuliani Plaza everywhere. And now we kind of remember him as sort of a comic figure. And this week it took a bit of a dark turn because one of his long-standing assistants has sued him in a New York court for like behavior that you wouldn't even call it sexual harassment, what's alleged in this. It was horrendous stuff. Primarily of a sexual nature, but there's also financial abuse and other things in there. And it just strikes me again, it's another lesson about exactly what you're saying about Lizzo. We make idols and role models, and these people are just human. And sometimes human in the most awful base ways, not human in the, oh, he still, you know, he puts his cup on the counter instead of in the sink. I mean, human in really awful ways. I mean, that was what grabbed me this week as my sort of, oh my God moment.
But is it that the, you know, the woman who did the documentary on Lizzo, she described like a massive ego and just this kind of monster that's being created, and maybe she didn't start out that way. Is it that does the power corrupt, as they say, or were they always this way? I can never understand. Like, I always find it fascinating. Do you remember Wiener, the guy, the Republican was he from New York?
He was
He
a
was.
Democrat from New York, Anthony Weiner. Yeah.
Sorry, he was a Democrat. And remember, he was real family values and all that. And he was married to Huma Abedin. And then it came out that he was, and it's not just, I can never understand, like, why do you have to be so weird as well? Like, why can't it just be sex? Why does it always have to be weird stuff? Why do you have to be a pervert on top of everything else? It's just so odd. And he was all Mr. Family Man or whatever. And then it turns out he's involved in photos and weird stuff and meeting women and, like, it's like, were they always secretly that way, or did they get made that way by some kind of weird backlash? Yeah, I find it
I
like
think
there's a psychological thesis there, John.
I think it's power and fame. I mean, I think you know, in all three cases here, Lizzo, Rudy Giuliani, and Anthony Weiner. I mean, to do some amateur pop psychology, we're talking about people who would not be, if they were not famous, would not be considered in any way sexually attractive.
Yeah.
I think, and then you add that kind of level of fame and engagement to it, and all of a sudden, that is, of course, apparently some kind of form of aphrodisiac, and all of a sudden they have access to opportunities they probably didn't have when they were younger, and they go a bit mad. And certainly some of the stuff I heard in the background about Lizzo, and the stuff I read in an affidavit about Rudy Giuliani, and the stuff that happened with Anthony Weiner, all suggests people who've kind of gotten a taste of something and completely lost control of their ability to control themselves.
But it's not like, oh well, like, give me a politician who has an affair with his secretary any day. It's not just that. It has to be perverse.
Yeah, we're a long way from Charlie.
It has to be weird.
Keenan, yeah.
Like, it has to be weird. Like, why does it have to be weird shit? Excuse me, but like,
well,
why?
I think that goes back to the sort of pornification of the culture, doesn't it? Like,
Maybe.
it does. I mean, like, it's kind of it's kind of no longer cool.
By the way, listener, if you think we're off, just Google Lizzo banana, and you can catch up on this convo.
Yeah, but it's kind of like it's gotten to the point where it's no longer cool just to want to have regular sex.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's like there are whatever number of different categories of interests and fetishes and all these sort of things, and it's almost or what's the word now they use almost in everyday newspapers in the US? Kinks. Like, unless you have 5 or 6 of those, you mightn't be. You're not anyone, unless you're like not into leather, or I'm not going to, there's it's no longer accepted.
I love the way you think that leather is going to be outer.
No, I don't.
Leather is kind of the outer limits of it.
No, that's very TV PG now for
yeah,
like
I know
for the audience, but there's like.
No,
Bananas.
There's definitely been a normalization. Like, what I found really interesting is, like, so I'm 40 now, right? And I came of age during the Sex and the City era, for example. And at the time, that was 99% heterosexual sex, right? With a few weird, things thrown in. And it was very popular, obviously. And I watched it, no joke, predominantly for the clothes, because as you know, I'm a bit of a clothes horse. And I loved all the fashion or whatever. And now in the last year or two or whatever it is, they've released It's Just Like That, or Just Like That, or whatever the follow on from Sex and the City is, with 3 of them, not all of them.
I haven't watched it.
It's so bad. It's so bad. It's so bad. It's so bad that I'm shook. I'm shook.
You sound like Donald Trump talking about one of his indictments.
Oh my God, it's so bad, John. Like, it's so bad. To the point where Keith's like to me, why? And I started watching it. So basically, like, when the kids are at school or at summer camp at the moment, and my daughter has a nap, and I usually do laundry or whatever, and there's a TV in our kitchen on the wall, and I stick something on, a kind of background noise, and I like the clothes and the kind of, the New York, like the apartments are lovely, and I kind of like it visually. Yeah, I like looking at it, but it's so bad. Like, it's so basically, I don't know if you even remember the characters, but Miranda is now, she's left poor Steve, and she's now with a non-binary person who is called Che, but formerly Cheryl, I think. So that's her. One of Charlotte's children is trans. Like the statistical chance of everyone. So now Miranda's trans relationship has broken down. So now she's a lesbian. Like
Okay.
it doesn't make any sense. They're in their 50s. The whole thing is a complete woke joke. And it's so bad that Keith comes back and I relay bits of it to him and he's like, why are you watching this? And I'm like, I can't stop because it's so bad. It's kind of fascinating. That every single woke talk point, every single thing you can possibly imagine is in it. You are being lectured about something every second. There's now extra characters. A friend for a beautiful, actually looking woman. She's a Muslim, or I think she's Indian Muslim woman who's friends with Carrie. A black woman who's friends with Charlotte. Her husband is trying to hail taxis in New York. No one will stop for him because he's black. Like it's constant. Every single hot woke button is pressed on it, like as if somebody in there has it attached up to a morphine drip and they're just pressing the button every 30 seconds. It's unbelievable.
Funny. It's funny. I watched Sex and the City at times when I was younger because it was on so much. You would pick up various.
You couldn't avoid it. Yeah.
Episodes of it. And I never particularly objected to it. It seemed to me like kind of sort of blandish soap opera. But what you're saying there, what you're describing, what I find is very interesting is the way, like, you described the lady who's with the non-binary person and then that relationship breaks up and now she's a lesbian in her 50s. I mean, this is presented on television, like these people are presented as role models. But I would suggest that somebody who's in their 50s, flitting from relationship to relationship, is still at that age trying to discover happiness and contentment.
Yeah.
And if you ain't done it in 50 years, I know we're talking about a fictional character, but this is a representation that people are being given. If you ain't discovered happiness and contentment in 50 years, I suspect you're not going to do it in a lesbian bar approaching your 60s.
But there's also zero. Sorry, go on.
I just want to say that's no disrespect to people who maybe do discover happiness in a lesbian bar in their 20s. But if you're at that age and you still don't know what you are, that's not something to aspire to in my book. Maybe I'm a stodgy old white man.
But there's also like Miranda, the character was married to Steve. They have a child, a son who's now probably, I think he's supposed to be kind of 20 or something. But there's just zero kind of suggestion that Miranda waking up one day and deciding that she's now in a relationship with a non-binary and she wants out of her marriage. There's zero kind of acknowledgement that might be difficult for the people who've been with her for 20 years. It's all like reinforcing that all that matters is me. All that matters is that I'm happy and everyone else is secondary to that. And I'm all for being happy, but like I have 3 children, right? Like it's been raining for a month. There was certainly days, John, where I would have been happier to just walk out of the house, go down to Malahide Village and get a coffee on my own and leave the kids to fend for themselves. But I can't. Like, part of life is that you put other people before yourself. And this is just like, well, I woke up one day and I met a friend of Carrie's who's non-binary and I've just decided I don't want to be married anymore. No, I think I'll just be with that. Like, bizarre. And just bizarre.
Come here, do you think this is connected to the fall of religion? Because as you're talking there, what I'm hearing is kind of like this constant self-actualization. The basic message, and I'm not particularly religious at all, but like the basic message of the post-religious society is you only got one life. And because you've only got one life, you have to put your own happiness and self-actualization first so that you kind of achieve what the Buddhists would call nirvana by the time you've reached your 70s and are ready to die because you've only got one chance at it. Whereas like the Buddhists would say you've got 50 lives, 50,000 lives to try. And the Catholics would say you've an afterlife and, the Mormons, whatever they say. But because we live in this society now where there's nothing else, there is only the self and there is only your own perception of the world and everyone therefore is the main character in their own stories. I think it's led to a dramatic uptake in selfishness in people. That the idea of actually sacrificing yourself for others. I'm not talking about the majority of people here. Majority of normal people are mums like you, Sarah, or dads like Keith, or they're putting their kids first. They're working every day for others. But I think in a certain segment of society that's culturally dominant, and represented to us all the time, the message is that that's wrong. That you're kind of a sucker if you don't actualize yourself first. And I think it's intrinsically connected to the downfall of religion.
I think it's intrinsically connected to the downfall of religion, but not necessarily in the way, like not necessarily because it's your only life. I think it's because, you're like, it's all now about your journey and your this and your that. And as you say, like everything about you is the most important. And you don't see yourself as part of a bigger, kind of picture, if you know what I mean. And I think that people, like I really noticed in the last few years, two things. I have noticed an uptick in people that I grew up with going back to religion.
Really?
Yeah, definitely. There's a few people from the inner city that I'm friends with, a good few now. And I've noticed, I saw somebody on Facebook, a Facebook friend that I was stunned. She was getting baptized a few weeks ago. And I've noticed an uptick in people that roughly around my age, that I knew years ago. And some of them, women in particular, would have been quite wild. And they're like going back to like very much being involved in religion. I have a male friend recently, we're at a wedding, and he was talking about how he'd started going back to mass. So I definitely think that there's a slight uptick. But the point I was going to make was that I think that people, without being aware of it themselves, are filling their lives with what I would call kind of secular, I suppose, secular religions, as in like manifesting spiritual awareness, like diary, journaling. Like a lot of this stuff is just prayer and worship dressed up in different clothes, and they don't even realize it.
I think, for example, a lot of the climate stuff is, and I'm not saying there isn't an issue with the climate, but what I would say is that a lot of the climate stuff, particularly amongst the very young, is transparently religious in its nature. I mean, you've got your God figure, which is Mother Earth. You've got your original sin, which is kind of humanity's pollution. You've got your penance, which is, get rid of your plastic bags and move to electric cars. And you've got your ultimate redemption, which is, Mother Earth in harmony with, saving the polar bears and all that stuff. There's a religious framework through which that stuff is understood. And there is as well in a lot of progressive causes these days. And I wrote a piece for The Critic that was published yesterday, Thursday, which actually today, as we're reporting it, about sort of how Ireland, I think, is in the middle of a kind of religious reformation, where we've turned away from Catholicism and embraced this kind of rainbow religion, with more zealotry than we ever embraced the old religion. And that was kind of summed up this week when you saw those young kids. And people may not have seen this, but there's a video online of some young kind of foreign-born evangelical Catholic kids who are doing some street preaching in Dublin, which probably wasn't very wise, but that's what they were doing. And this guy comes up and just attacks them in the middle of the street.
Oh, I did see this.
Yeah. And it struck me like, that's like, it's like watching lads going in to dissolve the monasteries in the 1500s under Henry VIII. There was a real kind of anti-Catholic zealotry there. The old faith is gone, and you're offending the new one. So yeah, I think there's definitely, like, religion is at the heart of our kind of culture war as a society, between people who kind of adhere to an older set of values, whether they adhere to the actual religion or not, and people who are actively discarding those values primarily because they're associated with the old religion. That's what I think.
Yeah, I like, but I think as well, like a lot of people are just without that. They don't realize it. And I wouldn't consider myself to be particularly religious either, but I think that they don't realize it. But that I used to work with this guy years ago. God, he must be 80 now. And he'd converted to become a Jew, and he was, I think like something like 27, 28. Mm-hmm. He'd been married twice, and he was divorced twice. And then he met this woman through a job, and she was Jewish, and he fell madly in love with her. And she was like, well, I'm not marrying someone who's not Jewish. And he converted. And I remember like having a long conversation with him about it. And he's so interesting. And he'd been married. I mean, he always was really funny about it. He said, I tell people I've been married 3 times, but one was for 1 year, one was for 2 years, and one's been for 37 years. So it's kind of like, But he said that one of the things I said, so you converted to marry her? And he said, I converted to marry her in a way, but I also had fallen into a really deep depression that had been going on for many years. And I felt very at sea and very lost. And finding God and finding religion was the thing that was the rope that I was able to pull myself back to the shore with. And it helped him tremendously. And I think there's a lot of people, like, if you're so angry and so triggered by some young people praying on the road that you have to physically attack them, that in and of itself is a demonstration that you're a bit lost and you need some help. Like, why does it, ask yourself why it bothers you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Because like, I mean, we're always hearing about, oh, this is triggering and that's triggering, whatever. So why is that triggering you so much? I mean, if I was walking down the street and I saw somebody praying, I wouldn't care. Like, what's it got to do with me?
Yeah, but even if it was something they were doing something that offended you, would you care? I mean,
No.
People like you and me, like, we live in a society where a lot of things that are going on are things that we don't inherently agree with. I mean, you go into Dublin in June, and it's festooned with rainbow flags. Don't represent me and don't represent you. I mean, you wouldn't think of ripping one down. I
No,
mean,
I don't care. I couldn't care less.
exactly. And it's bizarre. I mean, it really
Yeah,
was
I mean, I
bizarre.
don't like. I find that like that's like that's it in a nutshell. To be honest, like people are constantly trying to be offended. They're always offended by something. I don't get offended by much, and I don't get offended easily, and I'm happier for it. Like
Yeah,
what other people are doing doesn't really bother me that much. And like obviously, like we're here in a podcast, we talk about different things. You know what I mean? But like really deep in my core, bothering me in my deep soul so much that I would attack somebody, never. And it's like and things I see things that bother me. Like I said to you earlier on, like my friend is getting married tomorrow, and I'm making her wedding cake, and I needed some stuff. And there's a shop in town called Sugar Sisters that do cake making stuff, and I had to go in and get some bits. And so it was 10:30 on Monday morning, and I was driving up Gardner Street, and as I was coming up the street, there was a bus kind of slightly at an angle in the road. I was like, "What's going on here?" Or whatever. And then obviously the bus driver got into a fight with some men, young, maybe maximum my age, on the bus, and thrown them off. And so they came around the front of the bus, and they were on the outside, and they all started throwing bottles at the bus, trying to break the windows. I didn't wait around. I just drove around to get out of there, because I was like, next thing they're going to start throwing these bottles at the
so
cars that are here.
that story was I was wondering where you're going with it, and then we landed with kids throwing bottles at a bus. Where, in the middle of the city? Where in the city?
Gardner Street at 10:30 on Monday morning. Like, how's your Monday going? Also, not that it would be right, but like, if you saw that on a Friday night at 10 o'clock, you might go, oh, they're all jarred. It's 10:30 in the morning. Like,
On
I know
Gardner
this because
Street,
I
which
dropped my kids.
isn't exactly out the back somewhere. It's at one of the main thoroughfares in the city, and there were no
Yeah,
cops.
no. I saw loads of police at the Galway races, to be fair. Loads. But I did not see any police on Gardner. Now, I mean, look, police can't be everywhere. Like, this is broken out, like, all of a sudden on Gardner Street at 10:30 in the morning, fine. But, like, I find that to be profoundly worrying and, like, whatever. But I don't go home and start kind of freaking out about it. It's like we have a limit to we should have a limit to how much we let things affect us. Otherwise, you just live a miserable existence.
Yeah,
Everyone offends you.
that
Everyone bothers you. You see
that
people praying, you want to punch them in the head. Brilliant.
that is the thing about society that kind of gets me a lot of the time, which is that the loudest people in society always tend to be the unhappiest people in society. People
Yeah.
on on the radio telling you that they're offended about stuff. The people who want to ban this, that, and the other. What was it last week? Oh, oh, there was another thing that was proposed to be banned last week. I think related to cars. And it's just like if you're out there,
It was just cars in general. Just ban
I
cars.
think it might have been. Like if you're if you're like out there constantly complaining about being underprivileged and complaining about other people in society and wanting things banned and wanting to change the way other people live, my fundamental diagnosis of you is you're not very happy in and of yourself. Because if you can't just ignore that stuff, you know, you need to figure out what's going on with you, I think.
Yeah, and maybe there's a whole intertwining there with like people who are lost. They find false gods with singers, or they find false kind of like unachievable goals that the world will only be better if all cars are banned in the world will own. And these things aren't going to happen. So what you're signing up for is misery. Like you're not saying like, and that's kind of like one of the things I liked about Jordan Peterson when he first wrote that book. It was like one of his principles, 12 principles was like, get up and make your bed. Like you're really not qualified to talk about how everyone else should do this, that, and the other if you're not even able to get up early and make your own bed. Like he famously said he used to have all these protests at all of his, when he'd speak at lectures or colleges or whatever. And when he changed the time of his talks to 9 a.m., the protests were gone because these people couldn't be arsed getting out of bed. So, like, if you're signing up to be absolutely furious about cars, well, it's going to be a long life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, join your local residents association and get some ramps in your estate. If that, like, start small, but like, throwing paint at a priceless piece of art and pouring out the milk in Harrods and crying for the rest of your life because there's so many cars. I don't think your life's work is going to be achieved, I'm afraid.
No, it's not. Shortly before we came on air, to change the subject briefly, because I think we've talked about a lot there, and I think there's, coming from Lizzo and bananas at the start, there's just it's a good summation of where the culture is at. In terms of where the political culture is at, though, as we're chatting in the last hour or so, the news has broken from Limerick that Limerick Prison has finally summoned up the courage to move Gabriel Alejandro Gentil, better known by his new chosen name, Barbie Kardashian, from the women's prison to the men's, on grounds of safety for the prison officers and the females. And in fact, they consider him so much of a threat to the male prison population as well that he's going to remain in basically solitary, only allowed out of his cell when all the other prisoners are locked up for the safety of the other prisoners. And this person, until yesterday, was locked up with the women. Isn't that just insane? That it's
Well, I'm
taken.
glad that got sorted. It happened at the usual Irish glacial pace.
Yeah, I was
Like,
just we reported this story. Gript was the first sort of media outlet to break that story, and we broke it in 2020. It's now 2023. So for 3 years, this has been going on. This person's been in a women's prison, and eventually
but
action
kept
has been taken.
separate all the time, right?
Kept separate all the time, but bear in mind that the prison officers in the female prison are female.
Yeah,
They're not male.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
he was in the
And they're
care.
obliged to do search. Yeah, yeah.
They may be obliged. We can't say they're not obliged to go in and search him
Well, they're
every day.
obliged to do no, but they're obliged to do searches when he enters.
Yes, um,
So who did that?
a fair question,
A,
which
wo-
I
a
don't.
woman, a woman had to do that. No, but
Mhm.
like it's a really, you
Well,
know,
he's legally a woman, so yes, a woman had to do that. If a search had to be
yeah,
conducted, there is no provision in law for a man to perform an intimate
no.
search on a woman. Rightly,
And maybe that woman didn't want to do that for loads of reasons, you know? But
uh,
3 years later,
it's
I mean, at least
extraordinary.
they've seen sense eventually, but like still,
Yeah, well,
well,
there is a little bit of sense. I think on that issue, at least, that is one where a little bit of sense is sort of coming back into public life. Because I think
definitely.
for the last couple of years, there's just been this kind of attitude in the political classes, and not just in Ireland, but like in most of the English speaking world, outside of maybe America, where if a particular kind of wing of people in society wants something, they get it, no questions asked, because that's the progressive thing to do. And if they say it's progressive and on the right side of history, it must be done. And I think this is the
Mm.
first time in probably in 15 or 20 years that I can remember any arm of the Irish state taking a kind of backward step on something like this. Now, it's not exactly a U-turn. It's not revolutionary. It's a very small thing not to put up somebody who is pledged to kill and harm women in a women's prison, but it's not nothing either.
Yeah, I know.
So that is good. What else caught your eye this week?
It's caught my eye this week. I thought there was a lot of sadness. Like there was funerals of those poor girls who died in Monaghan. There was a lot. Like it's been a very kind of
That
sad
one,
week for me.
that one. Do you know that one really affected me? And normally these
Yeah.
stories don't. I mean, partly it's because, as regular listeners may know, I was born and raised in Monaghan. Now, not in Clones, where these people are from, but also because I was looking on Facebook, and I felt bad about doing it, but I'm kind of half a journalist, so I have an excuse. But what happened, I was looking them up on Facebook, and I was looking at particularly at one of the girls' dads, and just a huge and clearly very loving family, like
Yeah.
just like a very close knit. I think there's 10 kids in the family, and to lose one of them like that on what is supposed to be one of the happiest nights of your young life. I think most of us probably look back at our dead and cringe a bit, or many of us do. But at the time, it's certainly one of the happiest nights of your young life. But it's just unfathomable.
I
So
know. And
yeah,
and after the boys who went to EOS in Greece, like there's just been a lot of tragedy this summer. It's real, you know, young people like dying in those kind of accidents over the summer. It's just so,
yeah, and then add in the weather, and it's been a relatively depressing time. For
yeah, yeah.
for a lot of people, I think.
I
I was
saw James Brown as well from Fianna Fáil came out and said that am I right, James Brown had said that the government would have to do much better communication about the hate speech bill going forward. And I thought, well, like so they're still going to try and make that a thing. But
well on that.
also,
What did you think of Ógra Fianna Fáil calling on Helen McEntee to resign? I mean,
yeah, I read their statement and I thought, yeah, I mean, look, youth wings of the parties should always kick out in that way. I like to see it. It's good for politics. I thought it was a bit. I thought it was kind of late. Like I think they were a bit slow. I mean, obviously they had their conference or something, I presume. Um, yeah, I mean, they're showing a bit more like I don't know,
do you
say
think
testicular fortitude than the main party, but like
but this is what I'm interested in though about that very question, because you're more of the resident Fianna Fáil expert than me, but it would always have struck me, because I was a member of Ógra briefly in my teens, for my shame, but I was, and it would always have struck me that it's fairly tightly controlled by the main party, in that they don't want, obviously they don't want the youth wing to embarrass them, so there's a perfectly understandable. Also, they're young, so there's a degree of oversight there. Do you think there's a degree to which um, there are people in the higher levels of Fianna Fáil, we'll say, who'd be quite content to have Ógra Fianna Fáil say this sort of stuff and not necessarily be intervening to stop them? Or perhaps maybe giving them a pat on the back and saying, well said, we can't say that.
I think so, and I think like I don't think there's like I think that traditionally, certainly in Fianna Fáil, that's all I would know. That traditionally the party, like the headquarters and the party leadership, would give a lot of leeway to the youth wing of a party to talk and say and exercise their opinions on whatever they wanted, provided it wasn't completely off the wall.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's their right. That's the way a proper like a party should work. And I think that like for me, looking at that, I think it's good that like it shows there's a bit of lifeblood still in the party. There's days where you think there isn't. So at least the youth wing has a bit of, lifeblood in it. And they're coming up with ideas and whatever, and that's fine. I think it's more showing a stark contrast to what's happening at the upper levels of the party, which is very little.
Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be enough kind of criticism or comment on Helen McEntee. And look, some of that is a symptom of just the type of coalition that it is. That's fine. I saw an article during the week. Was it a tweet? Anyway, somebody was talking about how it's almost inevitable that the next government will just be Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil at all again. And that might be true. And that it's not a given that Sinn Féin will get in. And of course that's true. Nothing is a given. But I think it's so bad for politics and for the parties individually for that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I just think because what we're seeing here is just this kind of lazy, slow kind of, like it's very difficult if you have a coalition to skillfully criticize your coalition partner, causing enough stress but not too much stress on the arrangements that you have. Do you know what I mean? It is hard to do, and there's been politicians in the past who are very skillful at that kind of communication and very skillful at that kind of dance that they would do with the media and the other party, criticizing but not too much, blah blah blah. Well, we don't have that now, so I think that people just stay quiet, don't rock the boat. But what happens is that we suffer because there's not enough stress put on certain situations, like in this case, law and order, for any meaningful change to actually be executed.
Although I do think, for the record, I was skeptical a couple of months ago, but I think the hate speech bill is now dead. Not
Well,
because
we
of
will see.
not because of Ógra Fianna Fáil specifically, but just because I mean the second youth wing, Young Fine Gael, also came out and said they didn't want it in any way, shape, or form. Um, the all the momentum since it was suspended has been against it.
Mm.
There's been no announced amendments. Even announced amendments will be an admission that the first version was flawed. And you've also had this massive uptick recently in concern, rightly and at long last, about law and order, particularly on the streets of Dublin. And you've been talking on this show about something you saw on Gardiner Street, so that is well warranted. I just don't think Helen McEntee has the capital to
Yeah,
push this through anymore.
yeah,
And I don't think there's appetite in the rest of government, particularly, to push it through either. I'm sure now we'll do the dance of it going away and being under consideration, and
yeah, yeah. Of
all these
course.
things that will. Do you remember, like, a couple of years ago when the assisted dying bill came in? I think People Before Profit, and there was a big hullabaloo about how the Dáil had passed it and hasn't been seen since because it was sent to die in committee. They won't do that with this.
Pardon the pun, John.
Yeah, yeah. Sent for, I should say, it's just sent for a dignified death in committee.
Yeah, yeah.
But they obviously can't send this one to committee because of the stage it was at. But yeah, I think I would be very surprised if we see it back. Um, which is
I don't
it's
know
only
about that. I don't know about that. I think there'll be massive pressure from NGOs and stuff, so we'll see.
we will indeed. But anyway, I think we'll leave it there because it was an interesting chat this week. Sarah, thanks for joining us. I'm going to say thanks for joining us. You're one of us. Thanks for joining me as ever. To all of you heading away for the bank holiday weekend in August, as both of us are, enjoy your trip. Hope the weather is better wherever you're going, whether it be on this island or somewhere else. And to the rest of you, I will see you. Not sure if Sarah will, but I will definitely see you this time next week. So until then, from both of us, that was the week that really was.